A very good evening to you. The MP Jeremy Corbyn, for years a stalwart of left-wing British politics, has been elected the new leader of the Labour Party. He was a rank outsider for the job 3 months ago, but today won the leadership race with nearly 60% of the vote, way ahead of his nearest rival, Andy Burnham, with just under 20%. Mr Corbyn thanked him and the other candidates, Liz Kendall and Yvette Cooper, saying they'd helped reinvigorate the party. And he's now promised to fight for what he says will be a more tolerant and inclusive Britain. Our political editor Laura Koonsberg's report now contains some flash photography.
He's in there somewhere, the new Labour leader who wants to be your next Prime Minister. They knew it, he knew it. These rivals and the Labour establishment lost the argument.
Jeremy Corbyn elected as leader of the Labour Party.
This humble rebel had to be persuaded even to stand, yet 250,000 people named him their first choice. Months ago that seemed impossible. By this morning the only surprise was the scale of his support. A new suit, maybe, but ideas he's held for decades.
We don't have to be unequal. It doesn't have to be unfair. Poverty isn't inevitable. Things can, and they will, change. Thank you very much.
But many of these MPs' politics are so far from his, they will not grin and bear it. 7 of the shadow cabinet have already resigned.
He's done it not by a small margin, but by a mile, a thumping victory. The unexpected candidate is now Labour's accidental leader.
This is an enormous achievement.
Can you believe that you've won by such a margin? Can you give a brief word to the audience who voted for you?
But his face betrays how brutal the coming months may be. But tonight, euphoria. These are his people. Nearly 100,000 of them signed up just to back him. A new audience for the ideas of old Labour. And some of today's biggest smiles were from vintage faces. He told me he hadn't been so happy in years.
People are sick and tired of the last 30 years in which ordinary people got left behind while the bankers made a fortune.
What do you make of the scale of the result, Ken?
Just stunning. No one could have predicted. Oh, he will. With the majority like this, they'll have to. Oh, dear.
Corbyn and his new deputy, Tom Watson, triumphed under new party rules. Ed Miliband's real legacy, perhaps. Labour in the hands of its supporters, not its MPs.
Our party is a broad church, always has been, always will be, and the task of the leader is to reach all parts of that movement, and I believe that's what Jeremy should do.
He could only have dreamt of this.
Fantastic moment, fantastic mandate for change in Britain, fantastic enthusiasm for real democratic politics. It's a great day.
Our party membership to be even bigger. It's already now become the largest membership ever in the history of the Labour Party. That is
an overwhelming moment for his supporters. Overwhelming too for his wife.
We walked together, we marched together down that road.
But look who came to join the party. The most powerful union boss in the land, Len McCluskey. One of the first to embrace him on stage.
This is unlike anything the Labour Party has seen for decades. You can feel the passion, the faith, the joy in what they've achieved in this room. But can they ever persuade the whole nation that they have the right answers?
That's a good way.
They are convinced these lyrics could become familiar again. The red flag, Labour's old song. But could the rest of us ever join in?
Do you think the general public would choose Jeremy Corbyn as a Prime Minister?
Well, we'll have to see, won't we? But, you know, what they do want is politicians of conviction, people who say what they mean. They are sick to death of people coming on looking like they're reading off a script. Well, that's clearly not Jeremy Corbyn.
Away from the crowds, one cool Labour head told me it's unpredictable, exciting or fatal. Whether you think it's a glorious fantasy or a nightmare for Labour, it is now real. Laura Koonsberg, BBC News, Westminster.
So, what do we know about Labour's new leader and where he does stand on the big issues facing the UK? Our Deputy Political Editor James Landale has this assessment of Jeremy Corbyn's background and policies.
Meet Comrade Corbyn.
We are a socialist party and there are social solutions to the problems, and the solution is socialism at the end of the day.
For more than 30 years, the MP for Islington North has perched on the left of Labour politics, opposing Britain's nuclear deterrent, associating with controversial causes and people, doggedly rebelling against his party more than 500 times, a man whose appearance has changed as little as his opinions.
Is that the jumper that your mum made?
Yes, it is.
So the election of this 66-year-old former prep school boy has surprised many in his party, including his brother.
He's surprised to be in the situation he is now, but, you know, a month ago it was becoming clear that there's a hunger in the country for proper democracy, no more spin politics.
And your parents, if they could see it,
they would be totally over the moon.
And those with whom he stood shoulder to shoulder for so many years today repaid the favour.
He's a friend of Ireland. He will be an outstanding leader of his party.
So what are the policies of this left-wing leader? He opposes Conservative cuts to welfare and other spending. He wants to raise taxes on the rich and businesses. He'd renationalise the railways and big six energy companies. He'd get the Bank of England to effectively print money to spend on infrastructure, which some fear could mean higher inflation. And he'd almost certainly order Labour MPs to oppose airstrikes over Syria.
This election shows that Labour is now a serious risk to our national security, to our economic security, and to the security of your family.
But with many Labour MPs also worried about his policies, Mr Corbyn's task now is to unite his party. Today, at least 7 MPs left the shadow cabinet. Many others are considering their futures. Not all are fans of Che Guevara.
I voted for somebody else, so clearly it's not my view that he is the right person to lead the Labour Party.
I fear that we may not win the election.
Do you think Jeremy Corbyn is the man who's going to lead you to victory at the next election?
I think it's much too early to tell.
Of course I can see Jeremy Corbyn, the Labour leader, as Prime Minister.
Seriously?
I can, because I believe in Labour victories.
But those victories will come only if Mr Corbyn can appeal to the public in Tory England and SNP Scotland.
Unless he can very quickly demonstrate that Labour's got a credible chance of winning a UK general election, then people in Scotland are going to conclude there's little point in voting Labour, and that actually the only alternative to continued Tory government might well be independence.
Open your hearts and open your minds.
Jeremy Corbyn's first act as leader was to go on a demo for refugees. His huge task now is to turn Labour from a party of protest into a party of power. James Landale, BBC News, Westminster.
Well, our political editor Laura Koonsberg is at Westminster for us now. Laura, just how big a change is Jeremy Corbyn's victory for Labour?
Well, Clive, Labour has just ripped up its own rulebook from the last 20 years. It's hard to overestimate how big a move this is for the party. None of the people who've been in charge in recent times think this is a good idea. Only a tiny handful of the party's MPs honestly think they can go on to win the next general election under his leadership. But his extraordinary campaign has tapped into a desire in some parts of the public for something less slick, something more authentic, something more unscripted, a combination of old principles with a new energy. And he will do things differently from day one. The question is whether or not he can shift the wider public and politics with an extraordinary summer, an extraordinary campaign, and an extraordinary day like this. But my goodness, after a vote like this, his thumping victory, Jeremy Corbyn certainly has permission tonight to try.
OK, Laura, many thanks. Laura Koonsberg at Westminster. Now, in the day's other main news, 2 British women have been killed.